Jeni Thornley, and I'd just like to start by acknowledging that I'm giving this little talk, this 20-minute talk on the land and the country of the Gaimaragal people. That's on the northern beaches of Sydney, New South Wales. And I'd just like to start with a poem, actually, that's not from this country of the Gaimaragal people, but it's from Bill Nagy, who we know as Kakadu Man. And this is what he said in one of his poems. Rock stays, earth stays, I die and put my bones in cave or earth. Soon my bones become earth, all the same. My spirit has gone back to my country, my mother. This story is important. It won't change. It is law. It is like this earth. It won't move. Bill Nagy, 1985. So I pay my respect to the elders past and present of this land, this ancient land of Australia. And I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I'd just like to say that there was another pandemic, and there have been a number of pandemics through history and through Buddha's time, through the time of the earth. And there was a pandemic here in 1788 when the British ships came into Sydney Harbour. And it was a smallpox epidemic. And just about, we don't have the figures because we don't have the records of that invasion and the loss to the tribal people of the Sydney region. But we know from some of the records that some of the first soldiers kept that most of the Aboriginal people got smallpox and died. And in fact, in those first years of the colony, 1780s, the extent of the death was so massive for the Indigenous people that they couldn't carry out their mortuary rites, they couldn't carry out their ceremonial rites, and it was a place of great trauma. The settlement of Sydney Cove, where we live, where I live, around these beaches, which are beautiful, some people call this area that I live in paradise, because it's coastal, it's by the ocean, it's very beautiful. It is, yet it carries this deep history, the deep history of the Aboriginal people who lived here for thousands of years, living in small family groups, fishing, hunting, carrying out their ceremony. And it carries the history of that pandemic of 1788 or 1780s, when many, many died and very few were left in this area to tell the story. So I just start with that, sit with that trauma, that we sit with that trauma here. One of the Aboriginal elders, a lawyer, said in one of her talks about learning to meditate on discomfort. And I say that because I think this COVID-19 era, epoch that we're in currently, is about meditation on discomfort. And when my friend Dammit asked me would I give this talk, and I was a bit reluctant, actually, to tell you the truth, I was a bit reluctant to do this talk, just because it's confronting to share openly my feelings of pain. I'm not a Buddhist, I'm a student of Buddhism, but I am feeling quite a lot of pain and suffering at this time, and I'm in touch with it, and I'm meditating with it, and I'm getting a lot of support in my practice from some of the Buddhist networks that I'm in, which I'll talk a little bit about. Damath said to me, "Don't overthink this talk, Jeni." He knows me well. I can overthink things. So I'm trying to stay with my emotions and share with you this. I'm a parent, I'm a mother, and I'm also a grandmother. And in this COVID time, as you might know, and I'm over 70, I'm 72 this year, and in this COVID era, those who are over 70 have been asked to socially isolate. Now, I'm not that fond of the term socially isolate or social distance, and I'm quite, I feel quite tender towards another term that the Buddhist teacher at Audio Dharma, Gil Fronsdale in San Francisco at the IMC, Insight Meditation Center, who is my main Sangha at the moment. And in San Francisco, that county has asked their people to shelter in place. And that there's a lot of shelter in place has been used by many organisations at different times. It's been used to shelter from war or real immediate trauma, shelter in place, like air raid shelters. But South San Francisco County has asked its residents to shelter in place. And he gave a talk on sheltering and the meaning of sheltering. And he linked it to Buddha, and he linked it to Buddha's teachings about sheltering, and sheltering in the Dharma, and sheltering in the Sangha, and sheltering in place. So I'm sheltering in place, and the impact on that as a parent and as a grandparent is that I can't see my grandchildren or my daughters and my stepdaughter and their children. And I've been very, very involved in the care of my 3-year-old granddaughter for 3 years. And 2 weeks ago that all ceased, and I can't see them anymore. Yes, we're lucky. I'm in a first world country, so-called, and I've got the internet and I've got social media, but the 3-year-old child doesn't really get social media. It's not the same as being held or being read to in person or going for a walk or holding Nana's hand. And so one of my great challenges now is not being with my children and grandchildren. And I share that with you because when Damath rang me yesterday, I said, look, this is my struggle, actually. This pain that I've got about not being with my family and my children. I'm with my husband. He's sheltering in place. He's also a local medical practitioner, a GP, and he works in aged care and palliative care. And my family, my daughter and her family are also doctors. So they're in the front line as health workers. And I also work as a mentor in the Tibetan refugee community, of which there's 1,200 refugees in Dee Why, a suburb quite close to me here, and I mentor 3 or 4 refugees in English and settlement issues, and they're all healthcare workers. In fact, many of the Tibetans here, they do get work in healthcare. They're cleaners, they're laundry assistants, they're nursing aides, they're nurses. There's also many Nepalese. And that's the bulk of the aged care workforce. And they're certainly at the front line now because the first figures are coming out about COVID-19 in the aged care homes. So it's a very intense time for all of us, and all of us are digging deep into our support networks for navigating this time. For me, Audio Dharma, which is this online Buddhist site I linked into when I had eye surgery. You can probably tell looking at me in a close-up or medium close-up of this interview that this eye is different from that eye, and this eye's had eye surgery, and quite major eye surgery a couple of years ago. And at that time in recovery I couldn't read or look at screens, and I'm a filmmaker, so looking at screens in fact may have contributed to my eye issues, who knows. But at that time, when I couldn't read, I turned to Audio Dharma. I found Audio Dharma online, and it gave me an enormous amount of support, the talks that I could listen to. And so I've done several courses with them online, and I listen to their talks every day, and I practice with them. And they do give me a lot of practices to navigate my mind, the practice of mindfulness. And this morning I was listening to a talk by one of their speakers. They've got a lot of different speakers from different paths of Buddhism on the site. Principally it's a Theravadan site, with many of the monks and the nuns and lay teachers having trained in Southeast Asia and Burma, Thailand. But they also bring teachers in from many other paths, and there's a strong strand of teaching coming in from Soto Zen, which I get a lot of nourishment from as well. And excuse me, I'm just having a drink of water. I was listening to a talk this morning by one of the Soto teachers, Paul Haller, and I listened to some of the talks over and over again, the same talks, because there's so much in there. And his talk this morning, he referred to a book by a Western writer on sensitive mindfulness for how's the title go? Mindfulness practice for trauma. Is something like that. I might not have the title correctly. And that practice, which he talked a little bit about and gave with us, was about working with focused awareness and receptive awareness. So, and learning to be, or being fluid between those two states. So, in focused awareness, say I'm using breath practice or a sati practice to focus on my breath and not becoming obsessive about how I breathe. He quoted Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind in this talk this morning, and a student asked Suzuki, well, how do you breathe and what is your instruction on the breath? And he said, just breathe, and don't just breathe a little. And I took it as I understood that as not using the mind to control the breath, but becoming in contact with the breath to feel the body. So Paul was talking about this fluid movement between the practice of focusing on the breath, focused awareness, and then the fluid mind resting in receptive awareness, what comes up. And I really like this talk a lot because it kind of gives a lot of permission for contacting emotion and the somatic resting in the body, the somatic feelings resting in the body, and the heart, what is resting in the heart. And I really like this because this morning when I was meditating, listening to his talk and then meditating, I really did contact this feeling of separation, the suffering around the feeling of separation from family that I think so many are going through now across the world. Whether it's because they're close to death, as in New York, or any of the places in the world, China, Italy, Spain, the refugee camps across the world where people are really living very close to death, the death of their loved ones. So this particular practice, which was to be with the breath but also be with the emotions that are coming up while you're being with the breath. And this connects to this teaching that he was also referring to from the book Trauma Sensitive Mindfulness, that it can be really risky to meditate and be with trauma, and it can reignite the history of your own trauma and the history of trauma in place, whether it's the trauma in place of the invasion by the British into Australia and the pain and trauma in this land, meditation on discomfort. So Paul's teaching this morning was resting, learning to rest, or rather not rest, but abide with recognition, with insight into this trauma that's inside and the trauma that's outside. Be with the breath, but also be with the feelings. So I'd like to share with you that this morning when I was doing this practice, I contacted something about why I feel really dukkha, suffering at separation from particularly my granddaughter, that little 3-year-old, who I can't be with. And I contacted a familiar traumatic story in my own kind of story of being 3 and 4, coming into the 4th year, and getting really, really severe tonsillitis and being hospitalised and taken away from my family and my new baby brother who'd just not long been born, and going to the hospital, this is the 1950s, and having a very, very traumatic time. And this morning I realised, as I was sitting with receptive awareness, focused awareness and receptive awareness, that this pain of separation from my little granddaughter, who I love and who loves me, and we have a great time together, was actually, this pain was connected to this small child of me who was sent away from the family for what was then quite a major operation, and no contact with family during that time, like many people now in COVID-19 who are hospitalised can have no contact with family. Even so, I'm broadening the map from my own pain as that small child, and the pain I see on my 3-year-old granddaughter who's struggling to understand why she can't see Nana. And I think of the women who are, say, giving birth now, who are only allowed one partner, or the partner, no family members can visit them. So across the world, in our hospitals, in our nursing homes, in our funeral parlours, in the cellars in New York where the people who are holding the morgues can't contain the bodies, in Indonesia, which is struggling, in India, which has an enormous struggle on its hands for its people who have been forced to socially isolate, but who don't have the conditions, material conditions, to socially isolate. And coming back to Australia, to the Aboriginal elders who now need to isolate and shelter in place, but many of them have no place that they can shelter in safely. In the Aboriginal communities, in the desert communities, in the outback towns. It's a very real concern here now that the elders in the Aboriginal communities cannot shelter in place, and that even if they end up being hospitalised because they catch COVID-19, there's a 50% survival rate in the hospitals. This is a very difficult time for every community, for every person. And I feel very blessed that I have the teachings of Buddha and Sangha and the online community to support me at this time, learn to understand how to shelter in place, be calm, feel the feelings, and wish you all a safe journey. Thank you.